Hey crew, it's Pitt and I am back with some more Esoterica. Today we are finishing up the work of Rudolf Steiner. This is Theosophy. We are reading aloud and discussing as we go along the various points of interest that are brought to light by the text. It is not the format for everybody, but some people seem to get enjoyment out of it, so you are more than welcome to tag along. Before we begin, however, if you are unfamiliar with me, any of my unconventional beliefs, or if at any point in time I lose you in the terminology, there are several playlists linked in the corner up here, as well as the box down below with the source material, so that you can get a better understanding of who I am and why I stand where I do. I feel like I have outlined that fairly well in these playlists. I try to be clear as we're going along, but sometimes I miss the mark. With all that being said, we are going to dive into and begin our discussion of the last chapter in the book, Theosophy. This is the path of knowledge. Knowledge of the truths made known by Theosophy can be gained by each man for himself. Descriptions of the kind given in this book present a thought picture of the higher worlds, and they are, in a particular respect, the first step towards personal vision. For man is a thought being. He can only find his path of knowledge when he makes thinking his starting point. A picture of the higher worlds given to his intellect is not unfruitful for him, even if the time being it were only an account of higher facts into which he has not yet gained insight through his own vision. For the thoughts which are given him represent in themselves a force, which continues working in his thought world. This force will be active in him, and it will awaken slumbering capacities. He who is of the opinions that it is superfluous to make oneself receptive to such a thought picture is mistaken. He regards thought as something unreal and abstract. But thought is a living force. It is, for him who has the higher knowledge, a direct expression of what can be seen in the spirit, and it therefore acts in him to whom it is communicated like a germ, which brings forth from itself the fruit of knowledge. Anyone disdaining the application of strenuous intellectual exertion to the attainment of higher knowledge, and preferring to make use of other forces in man to that end, fails to take into account that thinking is the highest of the faculties possessed by man in the world of senses. To him who asks, "How can I gain personal knowledge of the higher truths of Theosophy?" the answer must be given. Begin by making yourself acquainted with what is communicated by others concerning such truths. And should he reply, "I wish to see for myself, I do not wish to know anything about what others have seen," one must answer, it is in the very assimilating of the communications of others that the first step towards personal knowledge consists. And if he should answer, "Then am I forced to have blind faith to begin with?" one can only reply that in regard to something communicated, it is not a case of belief or unbelief, but merely an unprejudiced consideration of what one hears. The Theosophist never speaks with the intention of awakening blind faith in what he says. He merely says, "I have experienced this in the higher regions of existence, and I narrate these my experiences." But he also knows that the reception of these experiences by another and the penetrating of his thoughts with such an account are living forces making for spiritual development. And this is what we're doing here, right? I am going through talking about the things that I have personally experienced. I am expounding upon them to make them a little bit clearer than what is in here. Then again, you don't have to take me on faith. It is up to you to have the dedication to do the prayer, fasting, and meditation that is necessary to do the things that I'm talking about. But what I am talking about is open to anyone who has the proper dedication and devotes themselves to it. One cannot, in fact, emphasize strongly enough how necessary it is that anyone who wishes to develop his capacity for higher knowledge should undertake the earnest cultivation of his powers of thinking. This emphasis must be all the stronger because many persons who wish to become seers actually estimate lightly this earnest, self-denying labor of thinking. They say, "Thinking cannot help me to reach anything. The chief thing is sensation, feeling," or something similar. In reply, it must be said that no one can in the higher sense, and that means in truth, become a seer who has not previously accustomed himself to the life of trained thought. In this connection, a certain inner laziness plays an injurious role with many persons. They do not become conscious of this laziness because it clothes itself in contempt of abstract thought and idle speculations, etc. But one completely misunderstands what thinking is if one confuses it with a spinning of idle, abstract trains of thought. For while this abstract thinking can easily kill supersensible knowledge, vigorous thinking, full of life, must be the groundwork on which it is based. It would be more comfortable if one could reach the higher power of seeing while shunning the labor of thinking. Many would like this, but in order to reach it, there is necessary an inner firmness, an assurance of soul to which thinking alone can lead. Otherwise, there merely results a meaningless flickering of pictures here and there, a distracting display of soul or astral phenomena, which indeed gives pleasure to many, but which has nothing to do with a true penetration into the higher worlds. Further, if one considers what great changes take place in the man who really enters the higher world, one will understand that the matter has still another aspect. Absolute healthiness of the soul belongs to the condition of being a seer. There is no better means of developing the healthiness than the true kind of thinking. In fact, it is possible for the health to suffer seriously if the exercises for higher development are not based on thinking. Although it is true that the powers of spiritual sight makes a healthy and correctly thinking man still healthier and more capable in life, it is also true that vague dreamings about these things, all attempts to develop while shirking the effort of thought, are dangerous to the health of both body and soul. No one who wishes to develop himself to higher knowledge has anything to fear if he pay heed to what is said here. But the attempt should only be made under the above conditions. Unfounded disbelief is injurious. It works in the recipient as a repelling force. It hinders him from receiving the fructifying thoughts. Not faith, but just this reception of the Theosophic conceptions and teachings is the requisite for the development of the higher senses. The Theosophist approaches his scholar with the injunction, "You are not required to believe what I tell you, but to think about it. Make it part of the contents of your own thought world. Then my thoughts will work in you and of themselves to enable you to recognize them as true." And again, this is something that I do, right? This is the first time I've seen it stated like this, but this is something that we have talked about many times going through all of these studies, right? I tell you the things that I know to be true. You don't have to believe them. I tell you that often. I am not here to convince you of things. I am here to tell you about things. Take them into yourselves. Investigate them yourselves. Go back to the source material. Read through it yourself. Spend the time thinking and try to understand what they are talking about. Try to figure out the concepts. I spend an awful lot of time doing that, right? I watch other people talk about it. I read various source materials. I spend an awful lot of time contemplating these types of things. I spend time manipulating the energies within myself. I spend time recognizing the subtle energies in other things. I spend time doing the fasting, prayer, and meditation that is necessary to enable this to happen in your life. I am here to tell you all of these things, the things that I have discovered, but I am not here to convince you of it. I'm not here to beat you in the head with, "Oh, you're thinking wrong." I will tell you that I think you're wrong. I will tell you why I think I'm right, and then I'm going to leave it alone. I'm here to tell you I have found something better, something more, something new. I haven't seen anybody else do the things that I am doing here, right? They talk about them in the way that I'm talking about them. They talk about this, right? The surface level, higher level stuff, but I'm digging into the meat. I'm talking about the real things underlying it. And I feel like I'm correct, but you do not have to believe it. I don't want you to blindly believe me at any point in time about any topic I am discussing outside of my own experiences, right? You can believe me when I talk about my own experiences, and I'm not talking about these experiences, but like the ones that are in the other parts of my story, right? The origin stuff. Believe that is true, but you don't have to. This, take it with a grain of salt. Go back and research it yourself. Spend the time to understand what I'm talking about. Your life can change. You can take control of your destiny. You can grab hold to the whole timeline that you're on, but I can't force you to do it. This is the attitude of the teacher of Theosophy. He gives the stimulus. The power to accept as true what is given him springs forth from the inner being of the learner himself. And it is with this attitude of mind that the theosophic views of life should be studied. Anyone who has the self-control to steep his thoughts in them may be sure that in a shorter or longer time they will lead him to personal vision. I believe that too. In what has been said here, there is already indicated one of the first qualities which everyone wishing to arrive at a personal vision of higher facts has to develop. It is the unreserved, unprejudiced laying of oneself open to that which is revealed by human beings or the world external to man. If a man approaches a fact in the world around him with a judgment arising from his previous experiences, he shuts himself off by this judgment from the quiet, complete effect which this fact can have on him. The learner must be able each moment to make himself a perfectly empty vessel into which the new world flows. Knowledge is received only in those moments in which every judgment, every criticism coming from ourselves is silent. For example, when we meet a person, the question is not at whether we are wiser than he. Even the most unreasoning child has something to reveal to the greatest sage. If he approach the child with his prejudgment, be it ever so wise, he pushes his wisdom like a dulled glass in front of what the child ought to reveal to him. Complete inner selflessness is necessary for this constant accessibility to the revelations of the new world. The 8 laws of creation. And if a man test himself to find out in what degree he possesses this accessibility, he will make astonishing discoveries regarding himself. Anyone who wishes to tread the path of higher knowledge must train himself to be able each moment to obliterate himself with all his prejudices. As long as he obliterates himself, the other flows into him. Only a high grade of such selfless accessibility enables one to receive the higher spiritual facts which surround man on all sides. One can develop this capacity in oneself of set purpose. One tries, for example, to refrain from passing any judgment on people in one's neighborhood. One should obliterate within oneself the gauge of good and bad, of stupid or clever, which one is accustomed to apply, and try without this gauge to understand persons purely through themselves. The best exercises can be made with people for whom one has an aversion. One should suppress this aversion with all one's power and let everything that they do affect one unbiased. Or, if one is in an environment that excites this or that judgment, one should suppress the judgment and, free from criticism, lay oneself open to impressions. One should allow things and events to speak to oneself rather than to speak oneself about them. And one should extend this even to one's thought world. One should suppress in oneself that which prompts this or that thought and allow only what is outside to produce the thoughts. Only when such exercises are carried out with the holiest earnestness and perseverance do they lead to the goal of higher knowledge. He who undervalues such exercises knows nothing of their worth, and he who has experience in such things knows that selfless accessibility and freedom from prejudice are true producers of force. Just as heat conducted to the steam boiler is transformed into the motive power of engine, the habitual exercise of selfless spiritual accessibility in man is transformed into the power of seeing in the spiritual worlds. Regarding this, right, they're talking about taking aside your pre-prejudices. If you take the time to go back and watch the Bible study, right, the unconventional Bible study, we began that by doing that in particular. We took off a specific set of glasses, and that glasses had 2 lenses in it. One lens said that Israel was the chosen people. We discarded that. Right, that was my pre-prejudice, and we took that away. And then the other lens was that there had to be a sacrifice for your redemption, that Christ had to die for you to be forgiven from sin. And we took that lens out of the glasses too. And then we read the book with an open mind to see what it actually said and whether or not we were in accordance with it, right? And by we, I mean me. And I wasn't in accordance with it at all. If the God of Israel is a real God, it is not one that I want to serve. He rewards exclusively the people who are murdering people. And I don't get down with that. I don't find that to be admirable in any way, shape, or form whatsoever. And so that's what happened there. That's how we wound up on this path. It was by setting aside those pre-prejudices, removing the lenses of the glasses that we were using to read it. Because most people who read the Bible do it with those glasses on. Those glasses make you see the story as it has been told to you instead of the way that it is actually written. It makes a big difference. You should go back and check out the Bible study if you haven't. It's long. It's 161 videos, and if you watch all of them, I'll make $1. So it's not about money, right? All right, back to the text. By this exercise, a man makes himself receptive to all that surrounds him. But to this receptivity, correct valuation must also be added. As long as a man is inclined to value himself too highly, at the expense of the world around him, he closes up the approach to higher knowledge. The 8 laws of creation. He who in regard to each thing or event in the world yields himself up to the pleasure or pain which they cause him, is enmeshed by such an overvaluation of himself. For through his pleasure and his pain he learns nothing about the things, but merely something about himself. If I feel sympathy with a man, I feel to begin with nothing but my relation to him. If I make myself entirely dependent on this feeling of pleasure, of sympathy, as regards my judgment and my conduct, I place my personality in the foreground. I obtrude it upon the world. I wish to thrust myself into the world just as I am, instead of accepting the world on an unbiased way and allowing it to play itself out in accordance with the forces acting in it. In other words, I am tolerant only of what harmonizes with my personality. Towards everything else, I exercise a repelling force. As long as man is enmeshed by the sensible world, he acts in an especially repelling way on all influences that are supersensible. The learner must develop in himself the capacity to conduct himself towards things and being and people in accordance with their peculiar natures, and to give each its due worth and significance. Sympathy and antipathy, liking and disliking must be made to play quite new roles. There can be no thought of eradicating these, of blunting oneself to sympathy and antipathy. On the contrary, the more a man develops in himself the capacity to refrain from allowing each feeling of sympathy and antipathy to be followed immediately by a judgment, an action, the more fine will be the sensitiveness he develops in himself. He will find the sympathy and antipathy of a higher kind awaken in him if he curb those which he already has. Even something that is at the first most unattractive has hidden qualities. It reveals them if a man does not in his conduct obey his selfish feelings. He who has developed himself in this respect feels more finely in every direction than one who has not, because he does not allow his own personality to lead him into a lack of receptivity. Each inclination that a man follows blindly blunts the power to see things in his environment in their true light. By obeying inclination, we thrust ourselves, as it were, through the environment instead of laying ourselves open to it and feeling its true worth. A man becomes independent of the changing impressions of the outer world when each pleasure and each pain, each sympathy and each antipathy, no longer calls forth in him an egotistical response and egotistical conduct. The pleasure one feels in a thing makes one at once dependent on it. One loses oneself in the thing. A man who loses himself in the pleasure or pain caused by each varying impression cannot tread the path of higher knowledge. He must accept pleasure and pain with equanimity. Then he ceases to lose himself in them. He begins instead to understand them. We talk about this often too. This is the change in perspective from got to get to, right? The change in perspective of why does this happen to me to what am I supposed to learn from this? It is a mental mindset. It really is. And I used to be on the wrong mindset. It was always, why is this happening to me? Why? And then that got to, okay, what am I supposed to learn from this? What is the lesson to be gained from this? Even when it sucks, even when it's painful, if you can learn it and start to accept it with equanimity, okay, this is a shitty situation, but there's a reason for it. Let's figure out what the reason is. What am I supposed to learn from this? It really does change a whole lot in your life. It really does. A pleasure to which I surrender myself devours my being in the moment of surrender. I ought to use the pleasure only in order through it to arrive at an understanding of the thing that arouses pleasure in me. An important point ought not to be that the thing has aroused the pleasure in me. I ought to experience the liking and through it the nature of the thing. The pleasure should only be an announcement to me that there is in the thing a quality calculated to give pleasure. This quality I must learn to understand. If I go no further than the pleasure, if I allow myself to be entirely absorbed in it, it is only that I am expending myself. If the pleasure is to me only the opportunity of experiencing a quality or property of the thing itself, I enrich my inner being through this experience. To the learner, pleasure and displeasure, joy and pain must be opportunities for learning about things. The learner does not become blunted to pleasure or pain through this. He raises himself above them in order that they may reveal to him the nature of the things. He who develops himself in this respect will learn to understand what instructors pleasure and pain are. He will feel with every being and thereby receive the revelation of its inner nature. The learner never says to himself merely, "Oh, how I suffer," or "Oh, how glad I am," but always, how suffering speaks, how joy speaks. That's what I was just talking about. He eliminates the element of self in order that pleasure and joy from the outer world may work on him. By this means a complete change takes place in the man. Formerly, he responded to this or that impression by this or that action because these impressions caused him joy or dislike. But now he allows pleasure and displeasure to become merely the organs by which things tell him how he should conduct himself towards them. In him, pleasure and pain change from being mere feelings to being organs of sense by which the external world is perceived. Just as the eye does not act itself when it sees something but allows the hand to act, so pleasure and pain bring about nothing in the learner, but merely receive impressions, and what is learned through pleasure and displeasure is what brings about the action. When a man uses pleasure and displeasure in such a way that they become mere organs of transmission, they build up for him within his soul the very organs through which the soul world opens up to view. The eye can serve the body only by being an organ for the transmission of sensible impressions. Pleasure and pain become the eyes of the soul when they cease to have any value in themselves and begin to serve one purpose alone, that of revealing to the inner soul the souls outside of it. By means of the faculties mentioned, the seeker of the path places himself in such a condition as to enable what is really present in the world around him to affect him without disturbing influences from his own personality. But he has also to adapt himself to the spiritual world around him in the right way. For he is, as thinking being, a citizen of the spiritual world. He can be this in a right way only if he guides his thoughts in accordance with the eternal laws of truth, the laws of the spirit land, laws of creation. For only in this way can that land act on him and reveal its facts to him. A man never reaches the truth as long as he yields to the thoughts continuously coursing through his ego. For if he does, his thoughts take a course imposed on them by the fact that they come into existence within the bodily nature. The thought world of a man who is absorbed in an intellectual activity, determined primarily by his physical brain, has an appearance of irregularity and confusion. In it, a thought enters, breaks off, is driven out of the field by another. Anyone who tests this by listening to a conversation between two people, or who observes himself in an unprejudiced way, will gain an idea of this mass of will-o-wisp thoughts. As long as a man devotes himself only to the cause of the life of the senses, his confused succession of thoughts will always be brought into order again by the facts of the reality. I may think ever so confusedly, but in my actions, everyday facts force upon me the laws of corresponding to the reality. My mental picture of a town may be most confused, but if I wish to walk along a certain road in the town, I must accommodate myself to existing facts. The mechanic can enter his workshop with ever so varied a whirl of ideas, but the laws of his engines compel him to adopt the correct procedure in his work. Within the world of the senses, facts exercise their continuous corrective on thought. If I think out a false opinion about a physical phenomena or the shape of a plant, the reality confronts me and sets my thinking right. It is quite different when I consider my relations to the higher regions of existence. They reveal themselves to me only if I enter their worlds with already strictly controlled thinking. Unless my thinking shows me the right, sure standpoint, I cannot find the proper paths, for the spiritual laws prevailing within these worlds are not condensed into the sensibly perceptible kind, and therefore they do not exert on me the compulsion referred to above. I am able to obey these laws only when they are related to those which govern me personally as a thinking being. Here I must be my own sure guide. The seeker of the path must therefore make his thinking strictly regulated in character. His thoughts must be by degrees disaccustom themselves entirely from taking the ordinary daily course. They must in their whole sequence take in the inner character of the spiritual world. The seeker of the path must constantly keep watch over himself in this respect and have himself in hand. With him, one thought must not link itself arbitrarily with another, but only in the way that corresponds with the severely exact contents of the thought world. The transition from one idea to another must correspond with the strict laws of thought. He must, as thinker, be, to a certain extent, constantly a copy of these thought laws. He must shut out the 8 laws of creation. He must shut out from this train of thought all that does not flow out of these laws. The 8 laws of creation. Should a favorite thought present itself to him, he must put it aside if the correct sequence will be disturbed by it. If a personal feeling tries to force upon his thoughts a direction not inherent in them, he must suppress it. Plato required of those who wished to be in his school that they should first go through a course of mathematical training. And mathematics, with their strict laws which do not yield to the course of ordinary sensible phenomena, form a good preparation for the seeker of the path. If he wishes to make progress in the study of mathematics, he has to strike out all personal, arbitrary choice, all disturbances. He learns by it to follow purely the requirements of the thought. And he has to learn to do this in all his thinking. His thought life must be a copy of the unchanging mathematical methods of stating premises and forming conclusions. He must strive wherever he goes and whatever he does to think after this manner, when the intrinsic lawfulness of the spirit world will flow into him instead of passing over and through him without leaving a trace, as it does when his thinking bears the ordinary confused character. Regulated thinking brings from him sure starting points to the most hidden truths. What has been said, however, must not be looked at in a one-sided way. Although mathematics act as a good discipline for the mind, one can arrive at pure healthy thinking without the study of mathematics. And what the path seeker strives to have in his thinking, he must also strive to have in his actions. These must obey the laws of the nobly beautiful and eternally true without any disturbing influences from his personality. These laws must constantly direct him. Should he begin to do something that he has recognized as right and fail to content his personal feelings, he may not, for that reason, forsake the road he has entered on. But on the other hand, he may not pursue it because it gives him joy, if he finds that it is not in accordance with the laws of the eternally beautiful and true. In everyday life, people allow their actions to be decided by what contents them personally, by what bears fruit for themselves. In this way, they force upon the course of the world's events a direction influenced by their personality. They do not bring to realization the true that is already prescribed in the laws of the spirit world. They realize the demands of their self-will. They act in harmony with the spiritual world only when they follow its laws alone. The path seeker may not ask, what brings me advantages? What will bring me success? But only, what have I recognized as the good? Renunciation of the fruits of action in the interest of his personality, renunciation of all self-will, these are the weighty laws which he must prescribe for himself. Then he treads the paths of the spiritual world. His whole being becomes penetrated by these laws. He becomes free from all compulsion from the sensible world. His spirit man raises itself out of the sensible sheath. Thus, he makes the actual progress on the path towards the spiritual, and thus he spiritualizes himself. One cannot say, of what use to me are all my resolutions to follow purely the laws of the true, when I am perhaps mistaken as to what is the true. The important thing is the striving, and the spirit in which one strives. Even he who is mistaken possesses in his very striving after the true, a force which turns him away from the wrong road. This force seizes him, should he be mistaken, and guides him to the right road. The very objection, but I can be mistaken, is itself harmful unbelief. It shows that the man has no confidence in the power of the true. To a certain degree, yes, right, but to a certain degree, no. Becoming overly confident in your abilities, is that to a certain degree? And being overconfident in yourself is like always be open to correction. I believe that I am on the right path. I believe that my way can work for everybody, but I don't necessarily believe that my way is the only way, right? I don't believe that any way is the only way. I believe that there can be another understanding of the same things that will lead you there, even if it is worded differently, if it is enacted differently. I believe that the 8 laws of creation are the 8 laws of creation. I would not reference them so much if I did not, but there are other people who do not believe that, and that is fine. They can live their life how they choose. I believe that my way is correct. I believe that it is a direct revelation from the source, from Creator, from God Himself. And so that is why I am on the path I am on. That is why I speak so confidently when I talk about the things that I know. But there are things that I don't know. And because there are things that I don't know, I will always say that I can be mistaken. I believe fully and firmly that I am correct in the things that I do. But you have to hold that you could be wrong. You have to. That's not unbelief, right? That is holding the possibility for correction. God will correct you. That will happen. If you are wrong, you will definitely be shown that you are wrong. But if you don't believe that you can be wrong, you cannot be corrected. And that is a major problem. Don't let that be your problem. It shows that man has no confidence in the power of the true. For the important point is that he should not presume to decide on his aims and objects in life in accordance with his egotistical views, but that he should selflessly yield himself up to the guidance of the Spirit itself. It is not the self-seeking will of man that can prescribe for the true. On the contrary, this true itself must become Lord in man, must penetrate his whole being, make him a copy of the eternal laws of the spirit land. He must fill himself with these eternal laws in order to let them stream out into life. As the path seeker, as the path seeker must hold strict guard over his thinking, so must he also over his will. Through this he becomes in life a messenger from the world of the true and the beautiful. And through becoming this he rises to be a participant in the spirit world. Through this he is raised from stage to stage of development, for one cannot reach the spiritual life by merely seeing it. On the contrary, one has to reach it by experiencing it, by living it. If the path seeker observes the laws here described, his soul experiences will take on an entirely new form. He will not longer live merely in them. They will no longer have a significance merely for his personal life. They will develop into soul perceptions of the higher world. In his soul, the feelings of pleasure and displeasure, of joy and pain, grow into soul organs, just as his body, ears, and eyes and ears do not lead a life for themselves merely, but selflessly allow external impressions to pass through them. As a result, calmness and assurance become inherent qualities in the soul of the path seeker. A great pleasure will no longer make him jubilant, but will be the messenger to him of qualities in the world which have hitherto escaped him. It will leave him calm, and through the calm the characteristics of the pleasure-giving beings will reveal themselves to him. Pain will no longer fill him with grief, but will tell him the qualities of the being which causes the pain, just as the eye does not desire anything for itself, but shows man the direction of the road he has to take. So will pleasure and pain guide the soul safely along its path. This is the state of balance of soul which the path seeker must reach. The less pleasure and pain exhaust themselves in waves which they throw up in the inner life of the path seeker, the more will they form eyes for the supersensible world. As long as man lives in pleasure and pain, he cannot gain knowledge through them. What he learns through them how to live, when he withdraws from them his feelings of self, then they become his organs of perception. Then he sees by means of them, and through them attains to knowledge. It is incorrect to think that the seeker of the path becomes a dry, colorless being, incapable of pleasure or suffering. Pleasure and suffering are present in him, but in a transformed shape. They have become eyes and ears. So long as one lives in a personal relationship with the world, things reveal only that which links them with our personality. But that is the transitory part of them. If we withdraw ourselves from the transitory part of us and live with our feelings of self, with our I in our permanent part, then our transitory parts become intermediaries for us. And that is what reveals itself through them as an imperishable and eternal in the things. This relationship between his own eternal and the eternal in the things must be established by the seeker of the path. Even before he begins other exercises of the kinds described, and also during them, he should direct his thoughts to this imperishable part. When I observe a stone, a plant, an animal, a man, I should remember that in each of them an eternal declares itself. I must ask myself, what is the permanent that lives in the transitory stone? What will outlast the transient sensible phenomena? One ought not to think that such a directing of the spirit to the eternal destroys the power of devoted observation in our feelings for the qualities of everyday affairs, and estranges us from the intermediate realities. On the contrary, every leaf, every little insect will unveil to us innumerable mysteries, when not our eyes only, but through the eyes, the spirit is directed upon them. Every sparkle, every shade of color, every cadence will remain vividly perceptible to the senses. Nothing will be lost, only an infinitude is gained. Indeed, the person who is not able to observe even the meanest thing in nature with interest will attain only to pale, bloodless thoughts, not to spiritual sight. All depends on the attitude of mind we acquire in this direction. What stage will succeed in reaching depends on our capacities. We have each moment to do what is right and leave everything else to the future. It must be enough for us at first to direct our minds to the permanent. If we do this, the knowledge of the permanent will, through this, awaken in us. We must wait until it is given. And it is given at the right time to each one who, with patience, waits and works. A man soon notices during such exercises what a powerful transformation takes place within him. He learns to consider each thing as important or unimportant, only insofar as he recognizes it to be related to a permanent, to an eternal. He comes to a different appreciation and estimate of the world from the one he has hitherto had. His whole feeling takes on a new relationship towards the entire surrounding world. The transitory no longer attracts him for his own sake as formerly. It becomes for him a member, an image of the eternal. And this eternal that lives in all things, he learns to love. It becomes familiar to him, just as the transitory was formerly familiar to him. This, again, does not cause him to become estranged from life. He only learns to value each thing at its true worth. Even the vain trifles of life will not leave him quite unaffected, but the man no longer loses himself in them. He recognizes them at their limited worth. He sees in them their true light. He is a poor discerner who prefers to go a-wandering in the clouds and lose sight of life. A true discerner, from his high summit with the power of clear survey and his just and healthy feeling for everything, will be able to assign to each thing its proper place. In this way there opens out to the path seeker the possibility of ceasing to obey the incalculable influences of the external world of the senses, which turn his will now here, now there. Through higher knowledge he has seen the eternal being in things. By means of the transformation of his inner world, he has gained the capacity to perceive this eternal being. When he now acts from out himself, he acts also from out the eternal being of the things. For the things give utterance in him to this being of theirs. He therefore acts in harmony with the eternal world order when he directs his action from out the eternal living within him. He becomes in this way no longer impelled by the things, he impels them according to the laws implanted within them, which have become the laws of his own being. The ability to act from out his inner being can only be an ideal towards which one strives. The attainment of the goal lies in the far distance, but the path seeker must have the will to tread the road. This is his will for freedom. For freedom is action from out of one's inner being, and only he may act from out of his inner being who draws his motives from the eternal. He who does not do this acts according to other motives than those implanted in the things. Such a one opposes the world order, and this must prevail against him. That is to say, when he plans to carry through by his will cannot take place. He cannot become free. The arbitrary choice of the individual annihilates itself through the effects of its deeds. He who directs his inner life in such a way steps upward from stage to stage. The fruits of his exercises will be that certain vistas of the supersensible world will unfold to his spiritual perception. He learns the real meaning of the truth communicated about this world, and he will receive confirmation of them through his own experience. If this stage is reached, an experience comes to him which can only be his through treading this path. Through beings whose significance can now for the first time become clear to him through the great guides of the human race, there is bestowed on him what is called consecration, initiation. He becomes a disciple of the wisdom. What a seeker of the path now experiences can only be indicated here. He receives a new home. He becomes a conscious dweller in the supersensible world. The river of wisdom flows to him from a higher source. The light of knowledge from this time forth does not shine upon him from without. He is placed within the fountain eye of this light. It is in it the problems which the world supplies are solved. Henceforth he holds converse no longer with the things which are shaped through the Spirit, but with the shaping Spirit itself. The separate life of the personality only exists now in order to be a conscious image of the eternal. Every lingering doubt that could formerly arise in him vanishes, for only he can doubt whom things delude regarding the spirit that rules in them. And since the disciple of the wisdom is able to hold intercourse with the spirit itself, each false form in which he had before imagined the spirit vanishes. The false form which man ascribes to the spirit in his conceptions is superstition. The initiate is above all superstition, for he knows what the true form of the Spirit is. Freedom from personality, doubt, and superstition, these are the characteristics of him who has attained to discipleship in the path. I don't know about personality. The path of higher knowledge. One must not confuse this state in which the personality becomes one with the comprehensive spirit of life with a disappearance of the personality. There we go. In the all spirit. Like I was like, no, you still retain your personality. And then we got to it where he said that. So Such a disappearance does not take place in the true development of the personality. It remains preserved as personality at the highest stage of its perfection. It is not the subjection of the personality, but its highest development that takes place. If one wishes to have a simile for the coincidence or union of the individual spirit with the all-spirit, one cannot choose that of different circles, which, coinciding, are lost in the one, but one must choose the picture of many circles, of which each has a quite distinct shade of color. These differently colored circles coincide, but each separate shade preserves its existence within the whole. Not one loses the fullness of its individual power, and the whole is the resultant of these individual powers. The further description of the path will not be given here. It is given so far as possible in occult science, which forms a continuation of this book. The way of man passes through many lives, incarnations. Patience ought to flow out of the real understanding of this fact. He who uses his present incarnation for his development prepares for those stages in which he will attain to intuitive seeing, to clairvoyance, to the full possession of his higher being, spirit self, life spirit, as well as to the remembrance of his former lives and to still higher experiences. It is possible for this to take place in his present life, or perhaps it may be in a following one. And so ends Theosophy by Rudolf Steiner. This was an interesting read, right? There was a lot of truth in here. There was a lot of maybe nots. I do fully believe that the way that I am explaining this, the things that I am expounding upon, have been directly revealed to me, right? Again, you don't have to believe this, but it is true. I had an experience. It was personal. We have talked about it before, but I was visited by a being. I was taken out of myself in a separate incident. I was initiated into the Order of Melchizedek. I am the only one, as far as I know, who has been. I have a method of identifying the others. I have a little bit more knowledge than some people do. I have had the experience that most people have not. That doesn't mean that there's not other people who had either the same experience or one very similar. There may be a separate path that runs parallel to the one I'm on, and it is just slightly different in terminology. What I know, beyond any doubt for myself, is that this path that I am on is the correct one. That doesn't mean I can't be corrected on this path. If some new information presents itself, either through direct revelation or through something that we read, I take it in, I consider it, I assimilate it, I use it. That is part of the path. Correction is part of the path. There is always diverging paths. When you're on the path, there's always a left and a right. Right? There's never really a walk down the middle. It's always a choose. Are you going to follow this way or are you going to follow this way? It is just a bunch of successives, right? Successive choices lead to the path that you are on. Life is about making those choices. Life is about embracing the lessons. Everything that you go through is to show you something. Everything you go through is to show you something. And beyond that, you have agreed on a soul level to every single lesson that you will ever be presented with. You have the capacity within yourself to embrace that, to look at it through that lens, to take off the lens of what the world tells you and to take off the lens of disappointment, to look at it through the lens of, is this true? Does it work? Is it divine? Can it be a useful addition to me on my path? You should look at every single trial and every single jubilation with the exact same lens. How is this particular instance teaching me something? Because everything is teaching you something. That's going to end this particular thing. We will eventually get to the occult science. I don't know if I'm going to start that one next. I have something else in mind, and I'm probably going to do that. But we will definitely be coming back to Rudolf Steiner with some more things. This was a fairly good explanation. I don't believe that he was correct, right? I believe that he was on the correct path, but I don't know that this defined things in quite the correct way. I could be wrong. but I don't feel like I am. Otherwise, I would not be saying this. If I am presented with direct clarification, I will take it. I always do. God knows how to do it. Hopefully I brought a little bit of enlightenment and not too much confusion to a series of somewhat difficult topics. I understand that I have a bunch of unconventional beliefs and that I have a tendency to step on toes when I relay those beliefs, but it is not intentional. I do not apologize for it. It is merely me doing the things that I have been directly called to do. I am here to teach you how to do magic, right? The things that have been forbidden to you, I am here to reveal to you. I am here to cast pearls, and I'm hoping that you're not swine. If you're following along this far, you are seeking knowledge, and I am here to give you knowledge freely, with no expectation of return. That is how I live my life. I follow the 8 laws of creation in every step of everything I do. Sometimes I fail. I will freely admit that sometimes I am misaligned. But I seek very diligently to align myself with those 8 laws of creation because they have effected change in my life. I know it sounds funny when my voice changes, right? But my vocal cords are still a little bit weak. I could work on manifesting that, and I could probably directly affect that in my life. But I have found that the indirect manifestation works much more solidly. The fact that the direction of the energy removed the cyst from my throat I cannot even explain how much of a thing that is, right? Like, it is miraculous. It is the power of God working through me. But he gave me the power to do it. He showed me how to direct the energies. He showed me directly how to do these things. And so that is what I'm trying to show you, that you can pull this energy up, that you can focus it where it needs to be, that you can indeed change your life through the work of magic. And I'm not talking about dealing with angels or demons or spirits or entities, right? It is directly between you and God. No intermediaries necessary. It is not through the use of ceremonial magic and walking around with a silver knife that was blessed by the moon in the 4th eclipse of the year. Like, some people tie really deeply into those tools, and maybe that is necessary for them, but for me it is not. The tools are handy. I use tools all the time, but that does not mean that they are the reason. The reason is God, and he lets you do any of that without any of the tools. If you like what I'm doing over here, let me know down below. Give me a like, share, and a sub. Throw me a comment. Let me know if you appreciate it. If you don't, if you agree or disagree, if it remains respectful, it gets to remain up. And if you really like what I'm doing over here, hit me with that super thanks. To the crew, thanks for hanging out. I appreciate every single minute that you are here with me, and I am praying for you every single day. Until next time, I love you. God loves you. You are perfect, whole, and complete just the way that you are. And this has been Pitt's Take. Peace.